guys, welcome back to Read Aloud with Miss Rafferty. I'm so excited. We're starting our new book and y'all got to vote on it this time. So I know you're really going to enjoy it. It is the sequel to our first book. We read Sideways Stories from Wayside School the first time, and now we're going to read the second book, Wayside School is Falling Down. So I really hope y'all enjoy it. There's such funny, silly characters in this book, and hopefully after this one, we can read the third one, so we can see what happens to all of our fun characters. All right. And for those of you who didn't read Sideways Stories with us, Wayside School is a school that was built with 30 classrooms, but they're all stacked on top of each other, so it's 30 stories high. And this is a story about the class on the top floor, on the 30th floor. And there's a bunch of different characters that we got to know in the first book. And I'll give you a little refresher on those characters. And their teacher is Mrs. Jules. And the other big character is Lewis, and he's the yard teacher. So that basically means he's the recess teacher. When they go out to recess, he's out there to take care of them because their teachers don't go out to recess with them. So we're going to go ahead and get started reading this. We're going to read either 2 or 3 chapters a day, just kind of depending on what our timing is like. And I'm really excited. I hope y'all enjoy. All right, first let's get a little refresher on our characters, okay? It says, meet some of the kids in Miss Jules' class. Todd got in trouble every day until he got a magic dog. Paul can't resist Leslie's pigtails, especially since they saved his life. Ron dared to try the cafeteria's mushroom surprise and somehow lived to tell about it. Myron didn't like being cooped up in a classroom, so he went down to the basement of Wayside School. Kathy likes to see bad things happen. Her favorite song is Wayside School is Falling Down. Jason had his big mouth taped shut. Now he can't talk or chew up all the pencils. Damien is in love with his teacher, so he put a dead rat in her desk drawer. And it gets worse because everything is weird at Wayside School. All right, we're going to go ahead and start reading on Chapter 1 now. Chapter 1, A Package for Mrs. Jules. Lewis, the yard teacher, frowned. The schoolyard was a mess. There were pencils and pieces of paper everywhere. How'd all this junk get here, he wondered. Well, I'm not going to pick it up. It wasn't his job to pick up garbage. He was just supposed to pass out the balls during lunch and recess and also make sure the kids didn't kill each other. He sighed, then began cleaning it up. He loved all the children at Wayside School. He didn't want them playing on a dirty playground. As he was picking up the pencils and pieces of paper, a large truck drove into the parking lot. It honked its horn twice, then twice more. Lewis ran to the truck. Quiet, he whispered. Children are trying to learn in there. He pointed at the school. A short man with big bushy hair stepped out of the truck. I have a package for somebody named Mrs. Jules, he said. I'll take it, said Lewis. Are you Mrs. Jules? Asked the man. No, said Lewis. I have to give it to Mrs. Jules, said the man. Lewis thought a moment. He didn't want the man disturbing the children. He knew how much they hated to be interrupted when they were working. I'm Mrs. Jules, he said. But you just said you weren't Mrs. Jules, said the man. I changed my mind, said Lewis. The man got the package out of the back of the truck and gave it to Lewis. Here you go, Mrs. Jules, he said. Ugh, Lewis grunted. It was a very heavy package. The word fragile was printed on every side. He had to be careful not to drop it. The package was so big, Lewis couldn't see where he was going. Fortunately, he knew the way to Mrs. Jules' class by heart. It was straight up. Wayside School was 30 stories high, with only one room on each story. Mrs. Jules' class was at the very top. It was Lewis's favorite class. He pushed through the door to the school, then he started up the stairs. There was no elevator. There were stairs that led down to the basement, too, but nobody ever went down there. There were dead rats living in the basement. The box was pressed against Lewis's face, squashing his nose. Even so, when he reached the 15th floor, he could smell Miss Mush cooking in the cafeteria. It smelled like she was making mushrooms. Maybe, on my way back, I'll stop by Miss Mush's room and get some mushrooms, he thought. He didn't want to miss Miss Mush's mushrooms. They were her specialty. He huffed and growled and continued up the stairs. His arms and legs were very sore, but he didn't want to rest. This package might be important, he thought. I have to get it to Miss Jules right away. He stepped easily from the 18th story to the 20th. There was no 19th story. Miss Zarves taught the class on the 19th story. There was no Miss Zarves. At last, he struggled up the final step to the 30th story. He knocked on Miss Jules' door with his head. Miss Jules was in the middle of teaching her class about gravity when she heard the knock. "Come in," she called. "I can't open the door," Louis gasped. "My hands are full. I have a package for you." Miss Jules faced the class. "Who wants to open the door for Louis?" she asked. All the children raised their hands. They loved to be interrupted when they were working. "Oh dear, how shall I choose?" asked Miss Jules. "I have to be fair about this. I know. We'll have a spelling bee, and the winner will get to open the door." Louis knocked his head against the door again. "It's heavy," he complained, "and I am very tired." "Just a second," Mrs. Jules called back. "Allison, the first word's for you. Heavy." "Heavy," said Allison. Heavy. Heavy. "Very good. Jason, you're next. Tired." "Tired," said Jason. Sleepy. Tired. Louis felt the package slipping from his sweaty fingers. He shifted his weight to get a better grip. The corners of the box dug into the sides of his arms. He felt his hands go numb. Actually, he didn't feel them go numb. "Jenny, package." "Package," said Jenny. B-O-X. Package. "Excellent," said Mrs. Jules. Louis felt like he was going to faint. At last, John opened the door. "I won the spelling bee, Louis," he said. "Very good, John," muttered Louis. "Aren't you going to shake my hand?" asked John. Louis shifted the box to one arm, quickly shook John's hand, then grabbed the box again and staggered into the room. "Where do you want it, Miss Jules?" he asked. "I don't know," said Miss Jules. "What is it?" "I don't know," said Louis. "I'll have to put it down someplace so you can open it." "But how can I tell you where to put it until I know what it is?" asked Miss Jules. "You might put it in the wrong place." So Louis held the box as Mrs. Jules stood on a chair next to him and tore open the top. His legs wobbled beneath him. "It's a computer!" exclaimed Mrs. Jules. Everybody booed. "What's the matter?" asked Louis. "I thought everyone loved computers." "We don't want it, Louis," said Eric Bacon. "Take it back, Jack," said Terence. "Get that piece of junk out of here," said Mauricia. "Now, don't be that way," said Miss Jules. "The computer will help us learn. It's a lot quicker than a pencil and paper." "But the quicker we learn, the more work we have to do," complained Todd. "You may set it over there on the counter, Louis," said Mrs. Jules. Louis set the computer on the counter next to Sherry's desk. Then he collapsed on the floor. "Now watch closely," said Mrs. Jules. Everyone gathered around the new computer. It had a full color monitor and 2 disk drives. Mrs. Jules pushed it out the window. They all watched it fall and smash against the sidewalk. "See," said Miss Jules, "that's gravity." "Oh, now I get it," said Joe. "Thank you, Louis," said Mrs. Jules. "I've been trying to teach them about gravity all morning. We have been using pencils and pieces of paper, but the computer was a lot quicker." Chapter 2. Mark Miller. Mrs. Jules rang her cowbell. "I would like you to meet Mark Miller," she said. "He and his family just moved here all the way from Macedonia." Everybody stared at the new kid. He stood at the front of the room. His knees were shaking. He hated having to stand in front of the class. It was as if Mrs. Jules had brought him in for show and tell. He felt like some kind of weirdo. He just wanted to sit at a desk and be like everybody else. But worst of all, his name wasn't Mark Miller. His name was Benjamin Nushmut, and he had moved here from Hempleton, not Macedonia. But he was too scared to mention that to Mrs. Jules. He was afraid to correct a teacher. "Why don't you tell the class a little bit about yourself, Mark?" suggested Mrs. Jules. Benjamin didn't know what to say. He wished he really was Mark Miller. Mark Miller wouldn't be scared, he thought. He'd probably have lots to say. Everyone would like him. Nobody would think Mark Miller was weird. "Well, I guess we'd better find a place for you to sit," said Mrs. Jules. She put him at the empty desk between Todd and Beebe. "Hi, Mark," said Todd. "I'm Todd. You'll like Mrs. Jules. She's the nicest teacher in the school." "Todd, no talking," said Mrs. Jules. "Go write your name on the blackboard under the word discipline." "Hi, Mark," said Beebe. "I'm Baby Gunn." "Hi," said Benjamin quietly. He decided he'd have to tell Mrs. Jules his real name at recess. He cringed. He didn't know why, but for some reason he had trouble saying his own name. "And what's your name, little boy?" an adult would ask him. "Benjamin Nushmut," he'd answer. "What?" "Benjamin Nushmut." "What?" "Benjamin Nushmut." "What?" "Benjamin Nushmut." "What?" "Benjamin Nushmut." "Oh, nice to meet you, Benjamin." He never knew what it was that made the person suddenly understand. When the bell rang for recess, everyone charged out of the room. Benjamin slowly walked to Mrs. Jules' desk. Somehow, he had to tell her. Mrs. Jules was sorting papers. "Oh, hello, Mark," she said. "How are you enjoying the class so far?" "Fine," said Benjamin. "Good, I'm glad to hear that," said Mrs. Jules. Benjamin shrugged, then walked out of the room. If I had told her my name, she would have thought I was weird for not telling her sooner, he realized. He stood at the top of the stairs and looked down. Recess was only 10 minutes long. It didn't seem worth it to go all the way down and then come all the way back up. He didn't have any friends down there anyway. He had never been more unhappy in his whole life. He sat on the top step. "Mark Miller," he said out loud. It was an easy name to say. Mark Miller probably would have made lots of friends by now, he thought. Suddenly, he heard a low rumble. Then the stairs began to shake. It felt like an earthquake. This whole stupid school is going to fall over, he thought. He put his head between his knees. The rumbling got worse. "I'm going to die. Nobody will even know who I am," he worried. The new kid, Mark Miller, weirdo. But it wasn't an earthquake. It was just all the kids running back up the stairs. "Hey, Mark, why are you sitting that way?" asked Dee Dee. "You look funny," said Ron. Benjamin looked up. "How come you weren't at recess?" asked Jason. "We looked everywhere for you." "Couldn't find you on the playground." "Couldn't you find the playground?" asked Calvin. "It's just straight down," said Baby. "You can't miss it." "We don't go in the basement," warned Sherry. "Whatever you do, don't go in the basement." "We'll go down together at lunch," said Todd. "That way you don't get lost." Benjamin smiled. He was glad everyone seemed to like him, or at least they liked Mark Miller. He wondered if they'd like Benjamin Nushmut, too. "The bell has rung," said Mrs. Jules, standing in the doorway. "Now everyone get inside." She made Todd put a check next to his name on the board for being late. Mrs. Jules handed a stack of worksheets to Damien and asked him to pass them out to the rest of the class. Benjamin looked at his worksheet. At the top right corner there was a place to put his name. He didn't know which name to put there, Mark Miller or Benjamin Nushmut. He left it blank and started working on the first problem. Lewis, the yard teacher, entered the room carrying a white paper sack. "Benjamin forgot his lunch," he said. "His mother just brought it." "Who?" asked Miss Jules. "Benjamin." "There's no Benjamin in my class," said Miss Jules. "Are you sure?" asked Lewis. "It looks like a good lunch." "I know the names of the children in my class," Mrs. Jules said indignantly. "Well, I'll just leave it here until I figure this out," said Lewis. He left the lunch on Mrs. Jules' desk and walked out of the room. Benjamin frowned. He looked at the white paper sack on Miss Jules' desk. He couldn't tell Mrs. Jules his real name now. She'd think he was making it up just to get a free lunch. He wrote Mark Miller at the top of his worksheet. But one of these days, he knew he'd have to tell her his real name. All right, that's all we're going to read today. I hope y'all are enjoying this funny story. I'll read 2 more chapters for y'all for tomorrow. I love you. I miss you. I really hope y'all are doing well. I'll talk to you later. Bye.